That's good.
Okay, we are rolling, gentlemen. Take two.
Take two, clap.
Well, it's our pleasure now to introduce Don Burney, a life member of Lakewood Country Club. We're going to be talking with Don for a period of time here, picking up the history that he's been exposed to for over the 50 years that he has been a member of Lakewood. So it's my pleasure to introduce Don Burney. Don, welcome.
Thanks, Vic. Appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Why don't you tell us a little bit, starting off, about yourself, where you grew up, and a background of your early years of life here in Ohio.
Okay, everything but my net worth, right?
Right.
No, I was born in Rocky River, and so obviously grew up in Rocky River, went to Rocky River High School, and met a little redhead there, and a few years later, that was in 10th grade, a few years later, proposed and we got married. So our whole family and our whole existence has probably been primarily in Rocky River as such, which isn't all that bad. But I graduated from Rocky River High School in '48 and went down to the Ohio State University, and hung around there for 4 years. I get my bachelor's degree in business administration. Barbara was a year behind me in high school, and she went to Tufts University in Boston, or Medford, Somerville, Massachusetts. So I got out of school and then had to work for a whole year waiting for her to get as smart as I was. And then we got married, and then from there on it was the family and the children and the dogs and everything everyone else experiences just in life. But Rocky River has been the home base as such in the growing up years here in Cleveland.
What was your time frame when you were first exposed to Lakewood Country Club, if you recall that?
Well, I'll start in the middle and work back and then work forward, because I joined with my father in 1950 when I was in college. And so my first experience as a member was in the summer of 1950. However, my experience at Lakewood Country Club dates before that, because my father would get invited out to play golf here at Lakewood Country Club with other business people up along, Lou Flandemeyer from Prosley Lumber and so on. And so in those days, it was a real country club, if you can imagine. Westwood Country Club was in the country when we were growing up, so you can imagine where Lakewood Country Club was. It was, you know, the other side of Toledo, I guess would be the best way to explain it. But a good friend of my folks was Carl Ben Battelle, and a couple other golf professionals. Carl Ben Battelle was the head professional here. And so Dad would bring me out as a little kid when he's going to play golf and dump me at the pro shop. And Carl and Edith Ben Battelle would be the babysitters while I roved around here playing at the playground and the whirligig merry-go-round and all that, while Dad was zinging the ball around the golf course. So my early experience, and fortunately be able to remember it, was probably in the late 30s when I was just a 8 or 9 year old coming out here. And of course all it was at that point was just a golf course. The old clubhouse was down on Bradley Road, and it was pretty casual as such on that, and even pretty casual after we joined in 1950, because I can remember on Saturday, which would be a big golf day, if you didn't have a golf game here at Lakewood Country Club and didn't pick one up by ball in the rack, they had a rack there, if you didn't get a game by 9:30, you had to hang around here until about 1 o'clock when the doctors got off, and there'd be a handful of them, and then you could get the next. There just wasn't that much play. It was out, let's say, a ways from civilization, I guess was the best way to describe it. But it was great days, and it was, you know, there were water greens and watered tees, and that was it. In August, July and August, like we have now, that course was just like, well, I'll put it this way, just like Bradley Road. I mean, it was hard, and that ball would bounce and roll forever. But those were good years also. So those were the early years, and then was here, and it wasn't long after that, in the early 50s, there was another group of younger men, not younger than myself, but decided they would do something at Lakewood Country Club and start upgrading it. And of course, the first upgrade that they came up with was I'm not sure of this, but anyways, to build a swimming pool to attract new members, and also put a sprinkler system in on the golf course so we'd have watered fairways. There was a whole shift in dynamics because Lakewood Country Club, being formed in 1921 as a Masonic recreation center, I assume went along in pretty good shape for the 10 years and then, or less than that. And then the Depression hit, and then of course everything was just a matter of surviving. And that generation moved on, and after when the Depression was about over, the war started. So there was probably from 1930 to 1946, it was just a matter of getting the grass cut. Well, then, as I say, you put another 5 years on that, and there was other fellows came along, Andy Hornick, Mike Manko, Jerry Sindelar, and I'm going to leave some names out, Bud Stewart, and they said, hey, we have to do something here. So that was the first impetus to move it up into a kind of a country club thing. And then later on in the early 60s, of course, came the new clubhouse, which we thought we were quite special, and we must have been, because that got Westwood saying, we have to do something with our clubhouse, except they seem to have the knowledge of how to burn half of it down before they started the construction. But that's sort of a standing joke with my friends, the Morrisons and the Hagans and that. But those were the early days at Lakewood, and they were just good people out here having a good time. It was a lot of fun. It was on it. So
Let me ask you a question on the old clubhouse. We've seen pictures of that, and we have those in our files. But do you remember the basic outline of, first of all, where it was situated, and what was the construction and maybe layout of it for the people who are maybe not aware of that?
Well, yes. First of all, there's a little swale that we have down here on the golf course, and the clubhouse, which was originally a farmhouse. And we have pictures of that around the building here. You can see it was right on that swale, which is at the bottom of the swale is where the creek goes through the golf course and on down towards Lake Erie and that. But the clubhouse got expanded, like all clubhouses do, and made a little larger, and finally the farmhouse literally got sort of engulfed, and they had a nice very nice. It was a frame structure. I mean, a nice wooden structure there. Ladies' locker room was on the second floor, a la Westwood, right? Same things happen. And then the men's locker room was in the basement. And because it had that swale leading down, you could get into the basement, and you could have a few windows so that you could see out. And it was pretty basic, but the men's grill was down there, and that was just a card room. Sort of facing the parking lot, although the windows were up high, and then the rest of it was just reception area. They did have quarters upstairs on it, which I never saw, for a manager. If he was hired and had to find a place to live, he could roost upstairs with his family and everything. I don't recall that happening. That was probably maybe some of the late 20s and thing, when there wasn't any housing out here. So, and then we had the porch out the back. That was over the men's locker room when that got expanded. And you could get from the dining room upstairs out on that porch, which was always a lot of fun to sit out there and watch the people playing number 1, which is what we call number 10 now. And of course you could hoot and holler and everything else at your friends and make noise so they would miss their shot and so on. So that was the original clubhouse. It finally got to the point you just couldn't add on to it. It was just a frame building, and with a porch in the back and a porch in the front, and you just couldn't add on to it any more of it and be of any practical use. So that's when the building committee in '62, I think it was, decided we ought to do something. That was Tom Ferry. I even left out some of those names. That and Brasino, and decided to get into this thing and build something. And so they came up here and built not this clubhouse as we know it now, but the center core of this clubhouse as we know it now was the original structure. Being a contractor, this was very well built. It might not be exactly what it should have been laid out to be, because it has that center core of utilities, the kitchen. You can't get the stuff in, you can't get over it, so you got to go down and around and back and everything, so you're sort of dog chasing its tail. But obviously concrete floors on the first floor, concrete floor right where we are here, concrete on this ceiling area up above us on this thing. So it was well thought out, well built, solid built on it. And even to the point that these gutters on the outside, which all gutters get clogged with leaves and everything, you can take a broom and sweep them out. There was a lot of thought went into it. So they did a good job of getting us started on this clubhouse.
Before this building was built on and you were using the other clubhouse, was this just all vacant land?
Well, the original layout of this golf course was that number one would be where number one is now. When we had the old clubhouse, you were down there. It was a parking lot down there and the road coming up here, and then it transversed through the golf course. So a lot of guys would come up and change their shoes up here by the old pro shop, which is the little putting green that's outside of number 10 T. So
the pro shop was actually separate from the...
Oh yes, it was just a little frame building on it up there, and so and that's the reason you came up, you walked up there, and then you went back down, and number 9 was number 18 on the golf course. So it stayed pretty much the same. The golf course got changed around a little bit in Cleveland Opens, and in early days when we decided we would play it up, because there was no point, well, they didn't think of going over here to play number 1 as we have it today, and they tried several concoctions of what the original Tillinghast layout was on it. But essentially we're playing the way Mr. Tillinghast had it designed way back in 1921.
After the key people that were instrumental, you mentioned, in the building of this clubhouse to its original design, were there some key people that you mentioned started and looked forward to saying, hey, we need to expand, to draw new members? The swimming pool was in place, and I'm sure the tennis courts were around there. Can you give us a little bit insight on what was happening when they were designing it, how people from the membership were involved?
Well, there's always some negatives when you go and decide that you're going to build a bigger and better clubhouse and everything. It isn't necessary. We don't need it. We've had fun here and everything else and all the rest of this thing. So, and you're always going to have that. I mean, there's people that have, decide, well, we don't need it. We can't hit the golf ball so far as we used to, and so maybe we don't need that, and we're not going to dance it. So there was controversy at the time, and I'll have to commend the people, and Sid Corporal was on. I'm going to mention some names, but I'm going to leave some names out, and that's going to be kind of tough. Ed Arnold, there was some people that decided, yeah, this was the time to do it. And so there was a lot of debate, and we did lose some members, but it opened it up to get newer members in and younger members. And we struggled through all of that. The Cleveland Opens came here primarily because we didn't have membership and we needed money. So in '66 and '68, we had 2 PGA tournaments here. Incidentally, the Cleveland Open, not particularly here, but when they were playing on the east side, I think at Canterbury and Beachmont and that was the first $100,000 Professional Golf Association tournament in America. $100,000. That's not to the winner. That was $100,000 for the whole prize money for everybody on it, and that was big money in those early late 50s, early 60s. So it kind of tells you how things have changed in everything, whether it's basketball tickets or Ohio State football tickets or whatever else. So, but there were those controversies, and you always hate to lose members for whatever reason, but sometimes the time just becomes right, and that's what happens.
Did you attend the Cleveland Opens in '66 or '67?
Yes, I did.
What was that like when you had some world famous names?
It was interesting because even from having that, in those days the PGA would have a tournament wherever it be Detroit or wherever else, and of course there'd be the guys trying to qualify to get in it because there were so many open spaces on the thing, and then they'd play the 2 rounds and it'd be the cut, and the guys that got cut would head back to the next town to look at the golf course and get tuned up and everything. So I've always found it was very interesting. By Saturday, the week before the tournament started, you could see some pretty good golfers out here playing golf and hitting balls on the driving range and all that. And then they would go off. They had no. There were restrictions. They couldn't be teeing off on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, but they'd play in the late afternoon, hit golf balls, and then go out and play 9 holes or 18 holes. It would be summertime, so it was daylight savings time. Play. And of course, a lot of, it's not all just the good golfers that play to the end of the tournament. Some guys miss the cut, so you'd have some pretty well-known pros here warming up for the Cleveland Open at the time. So that was interesting. And of course, when the tournament came, there was a whole bevy of Lakewood Country Club and CDGA members volunteering to be on staff and work and park and do all these things and clean up, and so it was exciting. It was fun to see Gary Player and Bruce Devlin and Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, and there was the whole gang. I mean, were here, and they were very courteous as such.
Were there big crowds out here? For
yes, they did have very nice crowds. Unfortunately, with Lakewood Country Club, it's a very confining golf course. It doesn't lend itself to, well, by today's standards, where you say there's 35,000, you couldn't get 35,000 people because you'd be standing in some other fairway on it. Some of the east side courses, Canterbury and that, they're spread out a little bit more. In fact, most courses are spread out a little bit more than what ours is here. So they had good-sized crowds, and we were able to park them. Of course, that was another advantage we had. We had this land here, and we built a parking lot over here to the right of our present entrance. You can still see shadows of that, and gravelled it all in. And I think Porter was the county engineer, and he managed to see that they had some leftover gravel, and so we had a parking lot over there that they could shoo the people in and park and handle it that way. So there were good crowds and good times.
The history of this club has been initiated originally by a club member who's passed away, Ken Stouffer. Ken, I know, was a life member, as you are. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the things that you remember about Ken, or his association with the club and beyond?
Well, you don't have enough time or volume in that battery for me to go in, because he was a very close personal friend. Met him in 1956. Dad and I came out to play an evening, and it was probably 4 o'clock, and went over to the first hole, and Ann Stouffer was there, and she introduced herself, and she was a good golfer. And of course, Ken was very adequate also, but Ann would win about 12 championships out here in the ladies, and competed in the Cleveland's Women's District Golf Association. But she introduced herself, and her husband was traveling in, and he'd be joining us. So that was the first meeting with Ken.